The moment the assassin, Anis, is seen fleeing after shooting a millionaire in front of his wife and children. He wasn't just another London resident. Flamma Bikiri was a known figure in Europe's criminal underworld, linked to drug trafficking, weapons smuggling, and a violent gang feud stretching from Sweden to the UK. On paper, he was a music executive. In reality, he was a marked man. It all came to a head on Christmas Eve 2019 outside his £1.5 million home in Battersea. Just after 9 p.m, Bikiri returned home with his wife and child. As they approached the front door, a man in a high-vis jacket and latex mask appeared from the shadows. 10 shots were fired. 8 hit Bikiri in the back. He died on the pavement as his family watched in horror. But the killer didn't just disappear. He left a trail. CCTV, DNA, and a ripped plane ticket pointed to Anis Hemesi, a Swedish kickboxer with no record. He had flown in, carried out the hit, and left the country within hours. What he didn't know was that police across Europe were already watching. A multi-agency operation tracked his movements, linked his network, and exposed the conspiracy behind the hit. This is the story of how a high-level gang feud ended in a London assassination, and how investigators traced it back across borders. Flamma Bikiri wasn't just a well-dressed man living in a £1.5 million townhouse in Battersea. He wasn't just the brother of Real Housewives of Cheshire star Missy Bikiri or a proud father of 2. Beneath the polished exterior and public image was something far more dangerous, a man deeply embedded in the heart of Europe's criminal underworld. Born in Albania but raised in Sweden, Bikiri had long attracted the attention of law enforcement. Though he presented himself as a music executive, Swedish police believed he was a high-ranking player in a major Albanian-Swedish organized crime group. He had previously been convicted for handling smuggled goods and was suspected of helping move millions in illegal imports across Scandinavia: drugs, weapons, alcohol, and counterfeit goods. Some charges didn't stick, others did. But to police, he was always more than just a name on paper. His network was tight. One of his closest associates was Daniel Petrovic, a known gang leader in Sweden. Another was Naif Adawi, a convicted armed robber connected to a £7 million security van heist back in 2010. These weren't small-time players. They were part of a criminal infrastructure that spanned borders, rivaled only by the Danish-based gang led by Arian Ari Mechko, another figure climbing fast in the drug trade across northern Europe. In the years leading up to his death, tensions between these groups had been steadily escalating. What began as competition for supply lines turned into something darker. In 2019, things exploded. Naif Adawi's partner, Caroline Hakim, was shot and killed while holding their infant child in Malmö. It was an execution, carried out in public, a chilling statement to those in the Petrovsky network. No one was untouchable. Bikiri had been close to both Adawi and Petrovic. He wasn't just connected, he was part of the inner circle. And in the aftermath of Hakim's murder, retaliation was expected. When it didn't come, speculation grew. Who would be next? The answer arrived on December 24th, 2019. Bikiri, back in London and living a seemingly quiet life, became the next target in a war that had started hundreds of miles away. His role as both insider and ally made him a valuable asset and a dangerous liability. To his enemies, he was more than a threat. He was a symbol. He'd left Sweden, but the conflict had followed him. And when the hit was finally ordered, it was done with planning, patience, and precision. This wasn't just a murder. It was a calculated elimination of a man who knew too much, stood too close, and couldn't be left alive. The man chosen to carry out the killing didn't fit the image of a professional assassin. Anis Hemesi was just 24 years old, a professional kickboxer from Malmö with no criminal record. On paper, he looked clean. No prior convictions, no ties to London gangs, no red flags that would have landed him on a watch list. And that's precisely why he was selected. Those behind the operation needed someone who could travel without raising suspicion. Hemesi's background made him the perfect ghost. A A Swedish national arriving in the UK just before Christmas wouldn't stand out in a crowd. And in the middle of festive chaos, when airports were crammed and surveillance systems overwhelmed, his quiet arrival went unnoticed. But he didn't come empty-handed. Alongside him were the tools of transformation: a latex mask, high-visibility workwear, gloves, a litter picker, and a black beanie. He'd come to London to play a part, and the role was that of a street cleaner. Harmless, invisible, exactly what a hitman needed to be. For several nights before the attack, Hemesi patrolled the streets around Bakiri's home in Battersea, disguised in full costume. He blended into the background of the city, sweeping the pavement with his litter picker, silently watching. CCTV footage would later capture his strange presence, his movements robotic, his face fully obscured. One neighbour even questioned why he was cleaning both public and private roads. Hemesi said nothing and moved on. He was rehearsing, but like any production, he wasn't alone behind the scenes. From Sweden, Tobias Andersson and Bawa Karim were believed to be handling communications and planning. In London, Hemesi was supported by Clifford Rollox and Claude Isaac, who helped him secure equipment and navigate the local area. And then there was Esteban Munizaga, who rented the flat at Oyster Wharf, the safe house located just minutes from Bakiri's home. The setup was tight. The flat gave Hemesi a place to change, store supplies, and plan his route. He'd scoped out escape options, including a green lady's bicycle that would later prove essential to both his getaway and the investigation. The plan was simple but clinical. Wait outside Bakiri's home on Christmas Eve. Kill him the moment he arrived, disappear before anyone could react. But even perfect plans can fall apart. And for all the attention to detail, one small mistake was about to bring down the whole operation. It was just after 9 p.m. on Christmas Eve when Flamma Bakiri and his wife returned home to their £1.5 million townhouse in Battersea. Their young son was with them, barely old enough to understand what was happening. The family had spent the evening celebrating, wrapping gifts, enjoying the kind of quiet joy that defines Christmas for so many. But someone was waiting. Hidden in the shadows outside the house was Anis Hemesi, dressed head to toe as a street cleaner. High-vis jacket, gloves, a latex mask covering his face. To a passerby, he looked like someone finishing up a shift. To police reviewing the CCTV later, he looked like death in disguise. As the Bakiris approached their front door, Hemesi stepped forward without hesitation. He pulled out a handgun and fired 10 times. 8 of those bullets struck Flamma in the back. The father of 2 collapsed instantly, bleeding out on the pavement just meters from his own front door. His wife screamed. Their child stood frozen. The attack lasted seconds. It was cold, silent, and brutally effective. Neighbors, drawn by the noise, rushed to their windows and front doors, only to find a scene they couldn't quite process. The gunman didn't stick around. He was already in motion, cycling away on a green lady's bicycle chosen specifically to help him blend in. In a city where couriers and commuters use bikes daily, the image was forgettable, but to detectives, it would soon become a lead. Hemesi disappeared into the darkness. He returned to the safe house at Oyster Wharf just minutes from the murder scene and discarded his disguise. The gun, jacket, mask, and bicycle were all hidden inside. Within hours, he was on a flight out of the country. His departure, quiet and unchallenged, was a gut punch to investigators scrambling to identify the man responsible. At first, police didn't know what they were dealing with. Robbery was ruled out almost immediately. Nothing had been taken. This was a professional hit, carried out in one of London's wealthiest postcodes, and it didn't take long for them to connect the dots. Flamma Bakiri wasn't just a family man or a successful music executive. He was known to police in Sweden, linked to organised criminal networks across Scandinavia. He had survived past investigations, even received a suspended sentence for handling smuggled goods, but his name had never been far from headlines, and never far from danger. This was no random shooting. It was the next chapter in a brutal feud stretching across Europe. And while Hemesi might have left the UK unnoticed, The evidence he left behind would soon do the talking. Within hours of the murder, detectives from the Met's Specialist Crime Command were already piecing together the outline of what had just happened. The first clue came from a neighbor's security camera. It showed a man dressed like a street cleaner moving up and down the road in the days before the shooting, sweeping, loitering, blending in, but he wasn't cleaning anything. He was watching. The man's movements were consistent. Each night, he returned to the same area around Bettyuri's home in Battersea, always dressed in the same high-vis jacket, beanie hat, gloves and latex mask. He carried a litter picker and moved like someone who belonged, but locals knew something was off. At one point, detectives now knew this was a premeditated hit. The next big break came from Oyster Wharf, a riverside flat just minutes from the crime scene. It had been rented by Estevan Pino Munizaga, a man with no known criminal history, but whose links to the case were too neat to ignore. CCTV had placed the fake street cleaner cycling to and from that same building. Inside, forensic teams found everything: the fluorescent jacket, the gloves, the litter picker, even the latex mask. But that wasn't all. Gunshot residue was recovered from the bicycle parked inside the flat, strongly suggesting it had been used immediately after the killing. DNA on food wrappers and drink bottles matched Hennessy. And most damning of all, a ripped boarding pass still in the bin with part of his name visible. Meanwhile, cell site analysis filled in the gaps. Police matched mobile data usage inside the flat to times when the suspect was off the street. The phone was active inside, silent when the man was out surveilling or carrying out the attack. It was a perfect digital match to the timeline captured on camera. Still, identifying the man behind the mask wasn't simple. He hadn't used a fake name to enter the country. He had flown into the UK under his real name, Anis Hemmesi. But he'd kept a low profile. A professional kickboxer from Sweden, Hemmesi had no criminal record. On paper, he looked like a tourist visiting during the festive season. But what stood out was his connection to Sweden's criminal landscape. Swedish and Danish authorities helped connect the dots. Hemmesi was known to be close to figures involved in a long-running feud between rival drug gangs. His name came up in confidential intelligence reports, though until this moment, he had never been tied to violence. When police traced his movements, they found he had flown into London days before the killing. After the hit, he boarded a flight to Copenhagen, then travelled on to Thailand before returning to Sweden. He'd kept moving, hoping the trail would run cold. It didn't. On his return to Sweden, authorities arrested him and began extradition proceedings. He fought it hard. Every court hearing, every appeal was an attempt to stay out of the UK, but the evidence was too strong, and in 2021 he was sent back to face trial. The surveillance may have been silent, but it had seen everything. By the time Anis Hemmesi was extradited to the UK in 2021, the Met had already built a near-complete picture of the murder plot. But this wasn't a one-man operation, and investigators knew it. The assassin had slipped into London with purpose. He had been supported, guided, and sheltered. Now, police wanted the rest of the web. The safe house in Oyster Wharf had been the starting point. Estevan Pino Munizaga had rented it under his own name just before Hemmesi's arrival. A Swedish national with no previous convictions, Munizaga claimed to be unaware of what Hemmesi had planned, but forensic evidence in the flat told a different story. Not only had he shared the space with the killer, but he had also helped set up the base used to plan and prepare for a brutal execution. He was arrested and charged with conspiracy to murder. Next came Clifford Rollocks and Claude Isaac, both based in London. Their involvement was more hands-on. Rollocks had helped Hemmesi obtain the disguise, the high-vis jacket, gloves and mask. Isaac provided local knowledge, helped scout the area and supported Hemmesi in staying under the radar. CCTV showed both men in the vicinity of the safe house and near the crime scene in the days before and after the hit. Each was arrested in coordinated raids and charged with assisting an offender, but the real complexity lay overseas. Tobias Andersson and Boa Karaya, both Swedish nationals, were suspected of organizing logistics from Sweden. Their digital fingerprints were traced through encrypted messages and phone records. The Crown Prosecution Service believed they'd played a key role in coordinating Hemmesy's movements and liaising with others in London. Still, bringing them to trial proved more difficult. While British police believed the case was strong, a UK jury ultimately found insufficient evidence to convict them. Anderson and Karaya were acquitted of all charges. As the arrests mounted, a clearer image formed. This was not just a local crime. It was the product of a cross-border criminal enterprise, planned in Sweden, executed in London, and covered up across 3 countries. By early 2022, most of those involved were either behind bars or awaiting trial. The quiet street in Battersea had returned to normal. But beneath the surface, the investigation had sent shockwaves through international crime units, from the Met to Europol. And in the center of it all stood the man in the mask, now finally facing the weight of justice. The courtroom at Suffolk Crown Court was packed when the verdict finally came. Journalists, detectives, and family members of Flamma Bikiri sat in silence as the jury returned after weeks of testimony and evidence. At the center of it all stood Anis Hemesy, former kickboxer, now convicted contract killer. He showed little emotion as the decision was read, guilty of murder. The trial had left little doubt. CCTV placed Hemesy near Bikiri's home in the days before the killing. Footage showed him dressed as a street cleaner, complete with high-vis jacket, latex mask, gloves, and even a litter picker. Residents recalled seeing him loitering in the area, sweeping streets that didn't need cleaning. One even challenged him. He calmly walked away. The disguise had been carefully chosen. So had the timing. Christmas Eve, when the streets were quieter and distractions were plenty, but it was the forensic trail that sealed the case. Gunshot residue on the bicycle, DNA on takeaway packaging in the flat, a torn plane ticket in the bin with Hemesy's name still visible. Each detail told the same story. This wasn't a robbery. It was a targeted hit. The prosecution argued Hemesy had been sent by a criminal network linked to a long-standing feud between rival Scandinavian Albanian gangs. Flamma Bikiri, though known publicly as a music executive, had deep ties to the Petrovsky Group, a faction at odds with the Danish-based gang led by Amir Mehic. Bikiri was seen as a high-value target. His murder was a message. The defense did little to deny Hemesy's presence in London. They admitted he was the shooter, but painted him as a pawn, an athlete manipulated by more powerful criminals. A clean record, no previous involvement in violence, just a young man who got in too deep. But the jury didn't buy it. In February 2022, Hemesy was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 35 years. The judge called it a meticulously planned and cold-blooded assassination. For Bikiri's family, it was justice, but justice wrapped in heartbreak. Others involved, Munizaga, Rolex, and Isaac, received lesser but still serious sentences. And as the trial closed, one question remained: if Hemesy was just the hitman, who gave the order?